may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Ow! What big eyes you have, the kind of eyes that drive most mad. So just to see that you don't get chased, I think I ought to walk with you for a ways. What full lips you have, they sure look somewhat bad. So until you get to Grandma's place, I think you ought to walk with me and be safe.
Everybody, it is another day of the commentaries of the night. Dylan McCandless, Super DM 64, is emerging from from the coffin adjacent to me to discuss another classic Universal monster movie. Dylan, what specific day is it though, or specific night? Oh, it's so confusing.
Shouldn't it? Yeah, I was about to say, shouldn't it be? It's another night of commentaries.
Oh, it's so confusing.
Of the night. Let's see. This is day 6.
I see. So day 6 of commentaries of the night. The contradictions in the title define our lives and make this truly a unique experience. What particular classic Universal monster classic film classic are we going to be commentating on tonight?
It doesn't get much more classic than that, does it? From 1935, The Bride of Frankenstein, the one and only sequel on our list of commentaries, and we're covering it and not any of the other sequels because The Bride is really the only monster introduced in a sequel who is as iconic as the other members on this list.
That's the major thing. The other big thing is that it's really the only one that's of the same caliber, if not even better, than the other films in the series, you know? Like,
yes,
all the other sequels are such a drastic step down or such a shadow of the former glory of their era. This is not that way at all. If anything, this is an upgrade, a step up, an expansion upon the already glorious original Frankenstein. And I think that's why it's easier to consider it that way. So it's also obviously a film that I like. You as well, correct?
This is the third James Whale picture that we have discussed, and many would consider it to be his masterpiece, although I'm a little bit more fond of The Invisible Man myself.
Me too. The Invisible Man is my favorite film of his, and one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Universal monster movie. But Bride,
I will that I think Bride is better than the first Frankenstein movie.
The production value is just hard to match, isn't it?
Despite the fact that the first movie took itself very seriously, and Bride is a lot more tongue-in-cheek. It's a little bit of sort of a pioneer, maybe the first horror comedy ever made, really, if you think about it. I don't know of any examples predating it. I'm sure there might be some from those silent movie days, but to my knowledge, it's the first like blending of those two things. And leave it to James Whale to come up with the idea of mixing the macabre and the outrageous, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, he didn't want to just recreate the first movie. He didn't think that he could recapture the success, so he just wanted to have a good time making it and make it a total blast to watch. So
I think he experimented
so he decided to introduce the comedic and just totally out there elements in order to make it that truly outrageous experience.
Yeah, I think he experimented with mixing in the comedy with the horror in Invisible Man, the previous film, but this is the movie where he really cranks it up.
That's
like
not
11.
A gothic horror movie though like this is.
True. But yeah, Bride of Frankenstein. It's great. You should all go find it somewhere and watch it along with us.
Indeed, you should. You should have it pulled up and ready to go in whatever form you see fit. And you should have done that already. But if not, pause the recording. Now, I guess. Come back.
If you haven't, by the way, I mean, the fuck's wrong with you, you know?
Yeah, like, seriously. You're such a failure. This is day 6. Dylan told you.
You already know what it is.
Yeah, we're watching fucking movies, man. You gotta have the movies. Or if you're not gonna watch the movies, then there's nothing I can do for you. And we're gonna be...
mistake to make on day 1 or 2, but it's day 6. There's only 8 days, you know?
You better get it right now, otherwise there's no point. You know? You might as well just give up. Go home. So let's press play for The Bride of Frankenstein in 3, 2, 1, play. How does this movie play nostalgically for you? When did you first see it? Was this an early one for you?
Out of all the Universal Monster movies, it isn't one of the very first ones that I saw, but it isn't one of the last ones either. It's somewhere in the middle, you know?
Yeah, I saw it later in life, probably when I was in high school was the first time I saw this movie in full. I saw bits and pieces, of course, when I was a kid, but I had seen the original Frankenstein, Dracula, The Invisible Man, The Wolfman, all those on TV and on VHS when I was a kid. Never saw this one, though. But when I got the DVD collection of all of them, I finally saw this one and fell in love with it. It's really just a huge step up in scope and imagination for these things that you would see in later versions. You know, like, and in later entries in this particular franchise, like the style of things like the Wolfman and Frankenstein meets the Wolfman and House of Frankenstein really borrow stuff from this. And hell, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. I don't think you could have that movie without this, you know?
This one has the most extensive score out of any of these that we've watched so far, and I think it's a very good one.
Yeah, he was apparently a guy who James Whale talked into it. James Whale was involved in every element of the production of this film, and that's what Universal wanted. He delivered them a massive hit with the first film, and this one was also a massive hit. It made $2 million. Any way you slice it, that's a good amount of money to make.
Yeah.
This opening bit here, obviously a recounting of the night that Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley first told the story of Frankenstein to Peter Byron and a bunch of other fucks in
a very dramatized version, but yes.
And she is played by Elsa Lancaster, who also plays the bride later on in the film. So what do you think of seeing this bit here? Obviously, it's a bit unusual to do this now, given that this is the second film in the franchise. Although I guess the idea is that now that we're introducing the bride, you know, the feminine aspect of Frankenstein should be more emphasized, I guess. Because the James Whale's idea was, I'm going to make the casting choice between the two of them the same, so that way it reflects the dark imagination of Mary Shelley in her own creation. You know, she's sort of reflected in the bride.
See, I think it's the first example in this film of the sort of the comedic twist that he brought to it. You know, the sort of it's a bit meta, isn't it? If I was to compare James Whale to Wes Craven, the first Frankenstein would be A Nightmare on Elm Street, and this would be Wes Craven's New Nightmare.
It's weird that it goes that big of a leap, but it does a bit.
Yeah, especially one movie later, as opposed to, you know, like 8 movies or however many was in between those two nightmares.
But you know what? This version of it is not that she's just telling them Frankenstein for the first time. She's already told them the major events of Frankenstein. This is a version where she hasn't told them the bit about the bride yet. So it's like it is a dramatized version of the real event.
You know what I also like about the idea of her having been told them the first movie and then now telling them the second movie?
What?
If you think about it, it kind of provides an excuse for why the book she wound up writing is different than the movies we've watched. Because you could assume that maybe it was different when she told it to them and then things changed when she wrote it down, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And then she mixed them into one story.
It almost creates an atmosphere in which you get to have both versions be equally valid. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think it just makes this work on its own level. I mean, look, they're showing stock footage from the first film, which came out 4 years prior, showing actors who are going to be cast in other roles in this film.
Yeah, I believe we talked about this a bit when we were doing our Kong commentaries, and we were talking about King Kong Lives. This is a common practice with sequels back in the day because there's no home video. And so if somebody missed the first film or just doesn't have a very good memory of it, they need a bit of a refresher. And so stock footage from the previous film is, or even picking up where the previous film left off, as with King Kong Lives and then some other examples I can pick up.
This does that?
Is a much more common practice, and it actually has a practical purpose. It's not just a cheap, lazy thing that they're doing, which I think it's easy to look back on it now and assume that it is,
Well, I think it does a good job of connecting the tissue to the first movie, but then also being able to sort of get control of what happened in the first movie and do its own thing with it, and move in its own direction. Because while it is a very close follow-up, it is also a very distinct film in its own right. And I don't think it's just the comedy. I also think it's the deeper emotional and intellectual levels that we take the horror to. The monster obviously gets a lot more development in this film, and I think that's another reason why it stands out so well and has become so iconic in its own right.
Yeah, the only problem with that framing device is that it works retroactively for the first movie. You can assume that she was always in that room telling them the story, and we just never knew about it. It doesn't work once you get into the further sequels. Am I to assume that Mary Shelley also made up the son, and then the ghost, and then the Wolfman, and then crossed them over?
Well, by the time you get the son, it's so far removed from James Whale that it doesn't even matter, even though Karloff's monster's back. I never thought about it that way, but you're totally right.
Yeah. If there's any one that I might imagine maybe is still being made up by this version of Mary Shelley, it might be Son, because it's still Boris Karloff. And then after that, no. It's also the last, good one, because Ghost isn't very good.
No, Ghost is terrible.
I do like Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, though. I love
Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman is awesome. House of Frankenstein's okay. House of Dracula's terrible. That's how it breaks down. We'll get there eventually. Do you find that close-ups in old movies are always weird? Like in this movie, whenever they get close up on somebody, I feel like it's a little weird.
I don't really get that impression. No.
Because it always seems like the camera has to zero in on them, put them in the center of the frame, and they always are clearly not looking at the other actor they're supposed to be looking at when they're talking.
Yeah.
As opposed to now, where you would put the other actor off frame, I feel like that's not the mindset at this point. Fuck old movies, no. So what this also does, as opposed to just showing a stock footage from the first movie, is it changes the ending of the first one. Because this is all different from what we saw in the last one, where we saw Henry Frankenstein taken home immediately without all these fucks, and it wasn't as dramatic and drawn out,
Right.
That's something that many sequels in the pre-21st century cinematic age would also do it, They would pick up immediately where this last film left off and sort of change what was going on at the end to fit their own means. Like Halloween Resurrection.
It's never bothered me before, but that's definitely not the same dad from the first movie.
Are you seeing him now?
I mean, he just fell into the thing.
That's not Frankenstein's dad.
No, I mean, he's not the dad of the little girl that drowned in the first movie, but he's supposed to be.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that. This Karloff. He looks awesome. Yeah, he's definitely not the same guy.
Yeah, his wife was just saying, it won't bring little Maria back to life. She drowned and yada yada. And then he fell into the thing. Also, they look way too old to have been the parents of that little girl in the first movie.
The monsters theme in this is also great. He looks amazing. Jack Pierce intentionally put a lot of work into making the monster look different, scarred by the fire, and it looks amazing.
I mean, the guy, sure, because dudes can keep having babies until they die, essentially. But that woman's ovaries have been dry for at least 30 years. I mean, come on.
If not forever. Thank you very much. Oh my god, you're so ugly! Oh my god. He just brutally murdered her. The owl's like, whatever. Seen it a million times.
Oh, and here we have that woman again. James Whale's favorite.
Yep. Whatever the hell her name is. Maria Uspenskaya? No, that's the,
That's the gypsy lady from the Wolf.
gypsy lady from the Wolfman.
We said her name during the Invisible Man commentary. Go listen to that again if you want to know what
Una
she's called.
O'Connor. Her name is Minnie in this film.
Sequels in these days, again, because there's no such thing as home video, nobody can rewatch the first one. They're a lot more willy-nilly with those retconnings of what happened previously, you know.
So,
It's something that...
Lady Frankenstein also recast in this film because Mae Clarke was sick in the first film. She was sick after the filming of the first film, and she would not return. So she was recast, and for the better, in my opinion. I think she has a lot more personality in this film. Mae Clarke was just a super... Or Mae West, whatever the hell her name was. She was just a super fucking generic blonde chick. Now she's got a little bit more personality and spunk in this film.
This movie, by the way, plagued with production issues. Soon after filming began, Boris Karloff hurt his hip, and so many of the monster scenes are done by a stunt double. Also, at some point, Colin Clive broke his leg, and so for a lot of the movie, he's sitting down.
He also had his alcohol problem was at a height at this point, so...
Yes. The movie was over budget and did not come in on time, so literally the two jobs that James Whale had. But it did make its money back, so that's...
It also faced a lot of resistance from the Hayes organization, who, you know, were the creators of the film code, you know, and they wanted to censor a lot of it. They wanted things cut. They wanted scenes changed. They wanted lines taken out. Things connections to God and homosexuality and overabundance of brutality and murder and rebelliousness to the government. They wanted stuff like that changed. James Whale kept as much as he could, and eventually it was approved and released. And as you said, it made its money back in droves.
I think the MPAA, but even worse and more arbitrary, if that's even possible.
Well, there was no set guidelines. It was like a case-by-case basis. And this was a huge release in all territories, so it was under massive scrutiny when the Hays Code initially started. So they got fucked, to say the least.
By the way, fuck the MPAA. That's my little PSA on the MPAA.
I think this elaborate bedroom is our first hint of the different scope of this movie. This movie is such broader in scope and has a much bigger budget than the first film.
There's not much effort made to make it look like the place from the first movie, is it?
No, there's no real care or attention to that. Because, again, they don't think anybody's going to remember because a lot of them haven't seen the first film since it was initially released.
Right. These things, this is what makes these movies slightly frustrating in this era of being able to watch anything you want, you know?
Yeah. So James Whale also didn't want to do this at all. He did not want to do a sequel to Frankenstein. He thought he'd wrung out the idea dry when he made the first movie. He came back because he wanted to make another movie called, like, One Over the River or something, a war movie. And in order to make that happen, he had to make this film. Because Universal was going to make a Frankenstein sequel anyway. At this time, they were going into production under the title of The Return of Frankenstein. But they had, like, several scripts under several different titles and concepts thereafter without James Whale's involvement. So by the time they got him involved, he hated everything that had been said and done about it prior. He threw out all the other ideas and got his own screenwriters involved, continually wasn't satisfied with the results until he finally hit with a screenwriter on the idea of the bride and making a female counterpart to the monster being the story and the thrust of the entire film. And that's when things got going. We got the script that we're now watching being performed, and we got the movie that we're seeing now. So, James Whale, at the end of the day, made a movie that he didn't want to make with the best possible intentions. Does that make any sense?
Definitely, yeah.
And I think that that's reflected in how absolutely desperate this movie is to be awesome in scope, entertainment value, experimentation, thought-provoking ideas, thematic weight, emotional weight. It's constantly trying to be the best version of itself. Like look at the German expressionistic architecture here, the weird angles, and here we have another massively iconic element of this film, independently of any other, Dr. Pretorius, Frankenstein's old crazy mentor, who wasn't Van Helsing.
Ernest Thesiger is fantastic, particularly in this film. There's another early horror film where he's in, where he very famously says the line "have a potato" and manages to say it in like the most menacing way possible.
If this guy told me to have a potato, I would shit my pants.
You should see the clip where he says it. It's the creepiest shit ever. I'm like,
well, I don't want to shit my pants.
How do you manage that with offering me a potato? That's amazing acting. But
thank you.
Yeah, he's great in this movie. Now that scene a moment ago where Elizabeth was speaking very dramatically about this metaphorical hand that was coming out to grab Henry and then sort of broke into tears. You think it's intentionally over the top, right? Like James Whale knows that he's sort of parodying this thing that's already a trope in horror movies at this point.
She doesn't think she is, though. And maybe that's why it works. Colin Clive is also very interesting in this movie because he's playing it dead straight. You know? He is an emotionally disturbed guy who is sick of this shit. He's not having any fun. And Dr. Pretorius is having a great time. So Dr. Pretorius was apparently... There are conflicting reports. Apparently, initially they went after Claude Rains and Bela Lugosi. But there are other reports that James Whale had the character intended and created after Ernest Thesiger, and that this was intended from the onset, so who knows. But had Claude Rains or Bela Lugosi been cast, that would have been cool. However, this is the iconic Dr. Pretorius.
I'm really glad that they didn't go with one of them. I like that Dr. Pretorius is not played by one of these, people that we've already seen in these Universal monster movies. Claude Rains, Bela Lugosi, they're kind of safe choices because they're sort of already part of the stable. I meant to say. Thesiger is this new element,
And it works better because he's playing a new, controversial figure who is living on the edge of society and humanity's limitations, making tiny people out of his own semen, as we're going to see. He's a wild character. And I think that that's another thing that's very distinct about this film, is that despite being post-code, it's 10 times more on the edge of sexuality and adult content in general than any other Universal monster movie, I think.
I think Dr. Pretorius is supposed to represent the full-on, over-the-top mad scientist, the thing that Henry has been struggling not to become. Basically,
a man who has lost his inhibitions, who no longer cares about the effect his experiments have on the world, but just the fact that he's able to achieve his experiments.
Basically, if you take that speech from the first movie, when Colin Clive is at his most insane right after the monster gets brought to life, that's Ernest Thessinger's entire character in this
Right.
movie.
He
you
seems
think-
almost given new life by Frankenstein's achievement. Like anything is possible now, more so because of what you did. Maybe he just feels like he finally has a kindred spirit in creating artificial life because he's done it in... I mean, what he's done is 10 times more impressive than Frankenstein, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So,
And here's an interesting idea. I never thought of this before. Since Dr. Pretorius represents everything that Frankenstein is afraid he might become, and since he also happens to be a very obviously coded gay character, could that mean that Dr. Frankenstein might be a bit of a closet case? Who knows?
yeah, maybe. That would make sense. That's why he's had so much trouble tying the knot with his love interest.
And never really seeming to be all that interested in her, even when they're getting married.
Do you remember in the first film when his dad thought that he was off with another woman, and in reality he was off with several men?
That's true.
I mean, reanimating dead corpses, but still poking and prodding into men.
It's an interesting interpretation. I wouldn't be surprised, given that it's James Whale. Put it that way.
I love that line. Do you like gin? It's my only weakness.
He says it again, too, later on with the cigars. Isn't it?
Yep.
Cigars?
Yep.
That's his spared no expense.
In that he only has several weaknesses. I love his little jacket without the sleeves tucked in.
Yeah. There's a rat-like quality to Ernest Thessinger's face, which is very befitting character. Like you could like he almost looks like Nosferatu, but he's not wearing any makeup. You know what I mean?
There is such a just straight-laced, controlled madness to him. He absolutely, totally buys everything he is selling. You know, he is not ironically laughing at his own madness. He absolutely, genuinely believes in everything that he's doing, you know, in himself and just all the bullshit that he's bringing onto the world.
And he has that sort of creepy thing where he's like really tall and really skinny and just like lanky. He has like long fingers and
he's a character who is distinctly of this era who you could never do now, you know? He's
wearing a yarmulke. That's interesting.
He's almost too subtle. He's too indistinct, you know? He's too mysterious.
We're about to be introduced to the little people.
There we go. They look amazing. They're one of the really amazing special effects. Like I said, made from Dr. Pretorius' very own semen.
Might there be a Mothra if this effect had not been achieved here? Who knows?
I can't guarantee.
You know, it actually looks better than the twin fairies from Mothra because they're in black and white, so they just sort of blend in a little better, you know?
I read that apparently when he picks up the king with tweezers in a few minutes, that had to be changed in the Japanese version because they weren't okay with the imagery of disrespecting a king.
All right.
This is Japan in 1935, remember? So
true, this is still very imperial. We hadn't even bombed them yet.
So what I find interesting is that we have the devil here. He's described as being a devil-like Lucifer character, the representation of evil. He looks like Dracula, though. You think that's a reference?
Possibly.
That's where you put Bela Lugosi. That would have been a clever nod. Yeah, this is the bit that Japan wanted changed. Kings have to be respected. You can't pick them up with tweezers even though they're made out of your own semen.
What did they do differently? Did they have the Pope try to rape the girl?
Yes.
Really? All right.
Exactly. It's thoroughly all right.
If he was going to make a dancer to entertain himself, why did he make a ballerina? He should have made somebody who knew how to twerk. He has a mermaid. That's fascinating. Colin Clive probably shouldn't ask one man how he achieved size. That's probably
That's a good question to ask other men. I dug in my own ballsack. The score, I find, a lot more whimsical than the first film. I think this goes a lot more with the idea of this is like a dark fairy tale type of story, and I think that's a lot more apparent in that we opened with Mary Shelley kind of telling the story, so it feels a lot more like a romanticized fictitious tale as opposed to this is a thing that really happened.
Yeah, well, it feels very dreamlike, doesn't it? There's a lot of like harps in there, and that's like the stereotypical musical instrument they use when people like flashback.
Yeah, but I think
it
it also makes it feel more fun, a little more light. But you know what? I still feel like this movie is also kind of darker than the first one. At least conceptually, it's so I think it's 10 times more fun, but it's also darker conceptually because the monster is going through a lot more psychological development, which is what we're seeing here. He's experimenting with more emotions than he got the chance to experiment with in the first film. He was just constantly so feared, and he killed that one girl. Oh, and see, look, this is interesting. This is him sort of redeeming himself, isn't it?
I always forget about this scene. I always think of like the blind guy, but I always forget about this.
But I think it's really good because it's a nice little like he tries to redeem himself for what he did in the first movie by saving this girl from drowning, which was his fault. Then she screamed and freaked out. He knew that would be a problem and tried to shut her the fuck up. So he's still continuing to screw up. And now he just got shot. And I believe he's going to be captured, either now or if not now, very soon.
Does he get captured before he encounters the old man?
That's what I'm not sure about. We're going to see. It's been a little bit since I've seen this movie. We shall find out together.
Yes,
he absolutely gets captured, yeah. That's a big symbolic part of the movie. That's where all the people who think that this is a big Christ allegory, take their screen caps from.
Yes.
I'm not saying there's none of that going on. I'm just saying that some people, that's all they talk about with this movie, that the monster is the founding member of this new race, and he's sort of Christ-like, and he makes a big sacrifice for the good of humanity at the end, so... Sure, but I don't think that's what the movie is really primarily about.
Well, I mean, James Whale definitely intended for that to be in there, but it's not like the whole deal.
No. Yes, I think he's going to get captured now, and he'll encounter the old not Gene Hackman later.
Oh yes, good old not Gene Hackman.
This movie looks a lot more modern than all the other Universal monster movies as well, because of the... Oh shit, he just fucking killed that guy. See, this is an older, wiser, less willing to take bullshit monster, If people fuck with him, he's just gonna defend himself. But obviously he's been overwhelmed here. if you made a Frankenstein movie now, I don't know if you would do it where he could be contained like this by all these people, you know? I don't know if we're in this world of these giant CGI monsters. I don't know if we could do a Frankenstein monster that was limited enough like this one is to be subdued like this. But realistically, he is just a bunch of corpses thrown together, so
Yeah,
he shouldn't.
quite the contrary. I think it's important that he be limited like this.
I agree. But I don't think he would do that now. Yeah, this is the big Christ-like symbol. But unlike Christ, he did actually do stuff that, you know, that he really did that warrants them, you know, throwing the rocks at him. I guess Christ technically did as well, but...
Yes, unlike Christ, he did actually do things, yes, that's true.
But in the sense that, you know, he killed a girl, he tried to strangle a girl a couple of minutes ago, even though he did save her. He threw a rock on a guy. You know, he's done some stuff that's not great. So, I'm not saying that he shouldn't be. I'm not saying they should throw rocks at him, but he should definitely be restrained. And that's what I think makes him interesting. Is that you feel bad for him and empathetic for him. And you see that despite his terrible disposition, he does try to do some semblance of the right thing. But he's just so overwhelmed in his senses and interpretation of the world that he can't seem to get it right. This is the imagery that I remember, though, him like shackled to this chair. Because this really gives a better sense of his strength than anything else we've seen, that they think they have to restrain him like this, which they do, and it doesn't even work when they get him angry enough.
I'd rather find him in my bed at night.
It's interesting. The makeup on the monster, he looks less dead than he did in the first movie. Like, in the first movie, he literally looks like this walking corpse, you know? And in this one, he looks a little more alive. He's obviously damaged from the fire. Like, that's very apparent in the forehead. You can see the burns and the bolts. But, his eyes aren't as, like, glazed over. His face isn't as tight. He's bulkier. He looks more lively. I also think part of that is that a lot of this is probably the stunt double and not Boris Karloff, the bulkiness I'm talking about now.
Yeah.
However, I still think that in the face, he looks more alert and alive and less as he did in the first one, you know? He looks less zombie-ish.
Do you think it's possible that after he was brought to life by Frankenstein, his body started generating new tissue?
I think what's going on is it's the same as we talked about it earlier. Psychologically, they're aging him up, you know? He's slowly but surely getting older. James Whale had a conversation with the Universal psychiatrist that they had on staff to discuss, like, you know, how people would react to certain decisions in their filmmaking. They discussed, like, what age range they should try and make the monster going for. So they made it like he has the intelligence of a 10-year-old and the emotional desires of a 15-year-old, which makes a lot of sense given the bride later on.
Story makes me think of the Warner Brothers psychiatrist from the Animaniacs.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's exactly the same thing. And I think what we're seeing in the change in design is he's no longer this newborn, you know, just like terrible, like, oh God, why would you bring me to life type of deal. He's alive now. He's been alive for quite some time. He's done some stuff. And now he wants some stuff. So I think his design is meant to reflect his more kind of vigor. His eyes are open. They're not glazed over. I think that's cool. And I never noticed that until this viewing. Like, I always interpreted it as though it's exactly the same design except for the burn marks, but it's not at all. I'm not saying it's so radically different that it's unrecognizable, because that's not true either, but it's different enough that you can tell that he's gone through some advancements. Here he's trying to communicate. You know, one thing that people always talk about with these movies, the Universal Frankenstein movies, I mean, is that they focus more on the monster than they do on Frankenstein himself. And we follow the monster as more of our POV through many different Frankensteins themselves and different scientists bringing him back to life. Oh, here's the blind man right here. But I think I think that the book already did that, and we only notice it more with the movies because they're condensed down. And as much of Frankenstein as we get is realistically probably about as much as we as we get in the book.
Do you suppose that's the root of, or perhaps part of, why so many people mistook the monster for Frankenstein for all those years?
Probably. I mean,
and I mean, it still happens. I do it as like a shorthand, just
yeah,
call them Frankenstein.
Totally. It's also funny because it pisses people off. I mean, it used to piss me off. Now I could care less. But I mean, at the end of the day, Frankenstein's monster is more accurate. And when you start calling the monster Frankenstein, when you refer to the scientist, then it becomes, then it starts to get confusing again, because then you're calling them the same thing, So that's why I usually try to just call them all the proper shit. But it's hard sometimes, Smoke a lot of weed. It's late at night when we do these commentaries. Who knows what we're saying?
I mean, realistically, the title of
the
this
audience
movie should
knows,
be...
and they're the ones who will judge us, so...
title of this movie should be The Bride of Frankenstein's Monster, but that just doesn't have the same ring to it.
And technically, Frankenstein did just get married. So... Or maybe he's going to get married? I don't know if they've actually technically been married, him and Elizabeth. So she is the bride of Frankenstein. So you can argue that the title refers to her. But she's barely in the movie, so that's obviously not the case. But, I just thought I'd throw that out there. Didn't they get
married in the first movie before Frankenstein came in and...
I don't know. I don't know if they actually went through with the ceremony yet. I don't think they did.
We did a commentary on this movie.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I remember it very well. But I don't think they specify whether or not the ceremony had gone through yet.
Okay, I definitely remember that she was wearing the dress.
I really like that he's gone through all this hell just interacting with people. And what I was getting to was, I think, regardless of how good the book is at focusing on Frankenstein as much as it does towards the beginning in particular, the scientist, I mean, these movies do a good job of focusing on the monster because that's where the real human element is. This version of Frankenstein is so down the fucking rabbit hole of insanity by the point we meet him in the first movie. He's hard to really empathize with and get in his head, because he's just so far gone already. But the monster's newborn, he's an easy protagonist in a sense.
Just to address the blind elephant in the room, as a person who grew up very young, having seen Young Frankenstein long before I saw Bride of Frankenstein, I always found it amusing how very right out of this movie the sequence in Young Frankenstein is.
It's identical. I mean, they every time I think of this scene in this movie, I imagine Gene Hackman as the blind old man because he's so much more iconic to me in that role. But this guy is just as good. I mean, he's more emotionally resonant in the sense that he's not pouring hot soup on the monster's cock and lighting him on fire. He really shows the monster this genuine sense of affection and gives him the benefit of the doubt. And that's something the monster hasn't been given yet. That's that human benefit of the doubt of like, oh, okay, you're another person, cool. He's like a feral animal here, like just for the first time allowing people to pet him.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably the scene in Young Frankenstein that was the most, like, faithfully recreated. So it must be a scene that Mel Brooks was very fond of. Everything else in that is sort of riffs on what happened before, but never quite exactly the same.
I mean, the way the monster is brought to life is identical in Young Frankenstein as well. Like, this version of the story is the version that version is, like, pulling all its beats from. It has zero similarity to the fucking Hammer version, or even really the book, outside of correcting the name. They make it Victor Frankenstein in the Young Frankenstein story.
Frankenstein, yeah.
Well, that was Frederick Frankenstein, you know. Oddly, in the recent Castlevania game, Castlevania Lords of Shadow, the version of Frankenstein they have is Frederick von Frankenstein. See, I just did it. Frederick Frankenstein, and I immediately thought, oh no, it's Frankenstein, because the only version of Frederick Frankenstein I know of is the one from Young Frankenstein. So I don't know why they didn't go with Victor or Henry or any number of other variations on the name Frankenstein, Wolf, whatever.
Or Frodrick, depending on your preference.
Frodrick. Why is he crying?
The old man?
Oh, there's some very obvious Christ symbolism there for you. It's a little more overt than I remembered. I didn't remember that shot.
He was crying because he's a lonely old blind man living in the forest, and
now he's got company. Okay, that's it.
Yeah. There aren't even
and he's
nursing
learning
homes
to speak.
This time period.
So you know what else I'm realizing here? This guy was in the original book. He doesn't have the family in this version.
But in the book, Frankenstein hides out in his barn, doesn't he? And he learns.
Yeah, I
from
mean, it's not
listening.
the same thing at all. He doesn't introduce himself to the old man until later, and they have a little rapport for a little bit until eventually they're discovered. It's not long. And
oh yeah, I remember this now. Yeah.
But it's the same idea of a kindly old blind man who's innocent and wise and benevolent, unlike the harsh cynics of the rest of the world who have shunned the monster, based strictly on his looks.
Well, a lot of this movie is using the last movie and then putting in more elements from the book that weren't used the first time around.
I'm remembering that it's more so than I even recognized when I initially saw this. Closer to when I even read the book.
Well, it's half elements from the book that weren't used in the first film, and half weird new material involving little people and Dr. Pretorius being a crazy person.
Dr. Pretorius and the little tiny people are definitely the most unique thing they added, and the design for the bride, because obviously the original novel never gets there. You know,
yeah, they never.
Frankenstein destroys the body before he reanimates it. He makes a body, but he never animates it.
Yeah, that surprised me the first time I read the book, because even though I still hadn't seen this movie when I read the book for the first time, I don't think, but I knew, of course, about the Bride of Frankenstein, just through culture. I knew what she was supposed to look like. And then the fact that they never actually got around to finishing her in the book was a big surprise.
Hmm. God, Boris Karloff is so good in this. See, now he's got a little taste of fun and life, and he's kind of full of it, you know? He wants an overabundance of it. He's smoking. This guy just leaves his fucking door open. Let me ask you this. If this guy had sight, do you think this scene would have gone the same way? If he was the same character, let's say he was exactly the same character, he just had eyesight. Do you think he would have reacted the same way?
I don't think so.
No, probably not. The whole point of it is that he doesn't have any idea that the monster is the monster, this corpse given new life.
I don't think he'd be a dick about it, but he would be very afraid.
I don't think he would let him stay with him. Because
No.
I think he would put two and two together that people would be out looking for him, which is he would have put two and two together that this would have happened. Because I think he's going to end up dead. Oh, yeah, well, the monster... See, look, that's the monster's fault as well. He started that fire. Okay, they take him out.
I don't think he would, like, get pissed off and attack the monster or anything, like a lot of people in these movies do. But
he might be too scared to give him any kind of friendship.
I imagine he would cower in the corner, and then the monster would feel bad and walk away.
I also think...
And then you could commit the Lonely Man theme from The Incredible Hulk as he wandered off.
Like this movie is like a really compressed version of an entire season of the Incredible Hulk TV show. He's just wandering around from town to town, causing trouble, and then moving on when he causes too much trouble.
Did the Incredible Hulk ever run across a friendly blind man who...
He went blind at one point. Or no, wait.
Close.
No. Well, yeah, I think that happened too. But he did encounter a blind girl at one point, and he, like, helped her out. He also, like, encountered aliens in that one. That was weird. Maybe he encountered aliens. It was very vague. More Christ imagery. See, there's a lot more than I gave it credit for earlier. I think I maybe should have put my foot in my mouth before about the Christ. The Christ imagery isn't a priority. I'm like, it's one of them. Now I'm like, it's definitely one of them.
That's why I said before, James Whale definitely intended for it to be in there. I mean, it's pretty blatant, but a lot of people act like that's the only thing that's going on, and it's not.
Is it like Man of Steel at this point, though, where he's literally just putting... I don't think it's that... I'm making that as a joke, largely, because I don't think it's as bad as Man of Steel, where it's like the exact sequences that are happening and are being mirrored in the story of Christ are being shown on the windows in the background, like in Man of Steel. Like, like we're just seeing Jesus on the cross a lot. That's it,
It's definitely not as on the nose as Man of Steel, because it's all done just through, like, subtle imagery. Like I said,
like you're just seeing crosses in the background as opposed to, like, again, exactly the same imagery as we're seeing unfold in real time.
The most obvious about it he ever gets is when Frankenstein himself is, kind of crucified in that one scene. But even then, it's never... He never has a conversation with a priest about whether or not he should make a heroic sacrifice.
The monster doesn't? No, he certainly does not.
Also, he's not an alien. That's part of what makes the Superman even more blatant.
Right. Well, I mean, in a sense, though, he is like the son of... If in this story, if Henry Frankenstein is the god, he is the son of God in the sense that he is the creation of God. Oh, there's Dwight Fry again. Oh, so these guys are grave robbers. They're not looking for the monster. Okay, so Frankenstein has refused to work with Pretorius at this point, correct? That was the whole point of him showing him the semen people, right?
Did he give in by the end of that conversation, or is
I'm
he still?
I'm pretty sure the reason the monster has to. I'm pretty sure Pretorius is keen to get the monster involved because it'll motivate Frankenstein to get in to work with him.
I remember that now, yeah. Pretorius encounters the monster, befriends him, and then uses him to basically blackmail.
I don't know if that happens right now or if that happens in like 10 minutes or so. Because I remember the monster coming in and Pretorius is like sitting at a table and he's like, I prefer the company of the dead.
Yeah, that's about to happen. After they leave and he stays behind to have like a glass of wine or something.
Yeah.
Or a cigar.
Which is great.
Or both.
He's not in as much of this movie as I remembered, though. And I'm not saying that's a problem, because he still has, like, this great presence. And again, it's more about the monster, and I think that that's awesome. Because the first film is, like, half set up, and then at the very end, it's more about the monster, half of it is getting us there. And again, I'm not saying that that's a problem. It's just different than this. And I think that this has more of this raw emotional impact. And that's probably why it stands out more to people. Because it feels more raw and unfiltered. It's just this dark, gothic, just romance like the original book was. And it's not all like... I'm sorry, not all. But it's not just, well, we gotta get us to the monster. We gotta introduce this concept to people. It's less reserved. And here we go. This is And I think this is definitely an example of being less reserved in a good way. You know, Dr. Pretorius here isn't your Minnie, your Una O'Connor, as we talked about before. His laughter isn't annoying or out of place. He feels homemade for this kind of thing and distinct. He's also exactly what the monster is looking for. Somebody who's going to give him a sense of direction and a sense of power, and somebody who also feels ostracized by the rest of the world. And Pretorius has more than one reason for it.
Even more directly, somebody who won't turn tail and run the minute they lay eyes upon him.
Exactly. But, you know, Pretorius has not just the horrible, you know, grave robbing experiments thing going for him, but he also has the homosexual thing subtly going for him. There's no really overt, you know, there's no statement of that, obviously, but that's clearly the intention, and what he does with his semen to make the tiny people is clearly supposed to be, you know, sort of a vague metaphor for that, I guess, because he sort of he subverts out, you know, a practical means of reproduction for this new form of life. I also think that it's okay that he picks up speech so quickly, because, yeah, he's this, you know, he should be like a newborn, but he is a former brain of this fully formed adult person slapped into this body. So I think it's less him learning English for the first time and him more relearning it. You know, and he's kind of putting it together slowly. Even if he doesn't really remember specific things about his life, whatever that was, prior to becoming the monster, like some other versions do.
Do you think it's... I wonder if this has ever been done. Is there a version of the Frankenstein monster who winds up remembering the life of the person whose brain originally belonged to him?
The thing I remember... Well, again, it depends on what version. Because sometimes when they do the when they, like, do a brain transfer, it's a complete 100% personality and memory transfer, you know? Yeah, he definitely refused. Elizabeth is telling him to go fuck himself. Yeah, because they're planning on leaving. Getting away from everything. Because they know that the monster is still out there. And they don't want Henry to get involved with it because he's still recovering. What were we saying, though? So, So, again, sometimes it's like 100% conversion. Then the only version of it with the actual proper creature that I remember doing it is the Kenneth Branagh, Robert De Niro Frankenstein. He describes picking up little memories and tricks and habits that he doesn't remember where they come from, you know? Like he'll just have a vague flash of a place that he doesn't really remember going to. He can, for some reason, play the flute, even though he's never, you know, he obviously never learned that, at least that he remembers. So that's the version that I remember doing it the most like that, but that was also the version where the monster's brain comes from the scientist, Dr. Whatever his name was, Dr. Waldron or whatever, who taught Frankenstein. And here we go, the monster is about to convince him to get involved in their cause.
I like the difference in methodology in this film, as Dr. Torres was just saying. Rather than use a brain that was already, you know, a brain, he has actually grown a brain from scratch that they will be using for the bride.
And that also shows why you need the two of them. Like, he can't just make the body himself. That's not his forte. He can't just grow a full body for her. He's got to have Frankenstein put it together and bring the whole thing to life and kind of put his pieces together. I think that's also why it's good. You know, Pretorius and Frankenstein, if they did see eye to eye, would make the perfect duo. Pretorius would make the individual pieces and Frankenstein would put them together. Because Frankenstein also holds the secret of the form of energy that he discovered in the first film that is able to resurrect the dead. That's the whole deal. There's some kind of ray that only exists in lightning. I mean, it's all pseudoscientific nonsense, but that was the deal. So they should make that more of a deal in this. Monster's having some flashbacks, too. His little soiree with Elizabeth in the first movie. What if they had made Una O'Connor like the fucking Nick Fury or whatever Marvel Cinematic Universe interconnective character you want to refer to? Like she appears in every Universal Monsters movie to connect the tissue.
You're talking about who now?
Yeah. The Minnie, the girl with the annoying voice.
Hell no.
Well, you know, I'm saying what if they did do that? Like that would be... Like, she's obviously a different character in this, but you could have her play, like, a servant character every time. And then it's...
You know who might fit that role even better?
Well, if you're going to do it seriously, then who would you pick?
Not her, and not fucking Russell Crowe. I think you could probably do that with Maria Ouspenskaya's character from The Wolfman. Because she kind of travels around. She's a gypsy, and she has, like, all this mystical knowledge. She could encounter different characters at different points. And then... I
mean, realistically, they should have made it Van Helsing from the first Dracula, because he doesn't die.
They actually did kind of use her to that end in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Larry Talbot goes to her,
yeah,
and
she's
the one. I believe she's the one who tells him about Dr. Frankenstein, and that's why he goes off in search of Dr. Frankenstein's note.
So the monster kidnaps Elizabeth, presumably... Oh, there's Dracula. Presumably to motivate Frankenstein to make the bride more so. I've just come from vomiting. He's in a lot less of this than I remember. I think we already said that. But are you having that experience as well?
I'm definitely seeing how he spends most of this movie sitting down because of his leg injury.
I'm also seeing how he's, you know, in the sauce a lot. Look how uncomfortable and sweaty and bloated he is.
Wow, so we're already approaching the...
But it totally works for the performance, though, doesn't it?
It does, yes. We've begun the final act here. We're about to get into the actual bride herself.
Okay, now this is Frankenstein's old castle. And this is the same. And that's good.
Yeah, it actually looks like they did either recreate this set or maybe it was just still standing.
I imagine that they probably had it still standing. Because all the equipment was maintained all the way up to Young Frankenstein. Like, it's still in that.
Yeah. Well, they did save sets occasionally. I mean, I told you before how the opera house from the Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera is still standing. All of those stages, all covered up with plastic.
This might be one of those as well. I don't know. But that's an important thing to get right, because that was a huge part of the first movie. One common criticism of this here motion picture is that, we're about 16 minutes from the end. The bride of Frankenstein herself has yet to make an appearance. You know, this film is largely known for her, this being her first and only film appearance, aside from some remakes in the future, far future. So, how do you feel about that? How do you attack that criticism head on?
I can see where that might be a complaint. However, the entire film is about creating her.
Not really.
Well, I mean, it's half that and half the continuing adventures of Boris Karloff. But it's all building up.
I would say it's like a third that. It's another third. It's another third of the monster, and then it's another third all this other stuff going on, like all the background stuff with the townsfolk and Frankenstein's personal turmoil and Dr. Pretorius's weird sexual problems.
All the stuff with the townsfolk, though, ties into the monster storyline, and all the other stuff that you just mentioned ties into the bride being created storyline, so it's still basically two storylines.
It feels like the bride herself is only brought up so far in, though.
I like that moment there. It's one of the most overt instances of straight-up murder in a Universal horror film of this era. It's very Jack the Ripper.
Well, it was a more stereotypical, like, you know, serial murder, as opposed to what the monster did earlier when he fucking dropped the rock on somebody.
And I love that joke there when Don Fry says, "It was a very fresh one," and then Dr. Pretorius drops the instruments there. Yeah, I never noticed that before, reading about the leg injury. But yeah, all the experimenting in the first movie was a lot of running around the lab and adjusting instruments. And in this movie, he's sitting at a table flicking switches like Davros or some shit.
It's interesting that they're talking to each other, isn't it? I wish they got the chance to have more of a conversation. But their relationship is strictly, hey, I'm forcing you to do a thing for me. I don't want to do the thing. We'll do the thing anyway. All right, I'll do the thing reluctantly. Sitting down, of course.
Yeah. Let's think about it. The entire creation of the character of Dr. Pretorius is to do the thing that Frankenstein did or the monster, I should say. It's to do the thing that the monster did himself in the book, but they can't have him do in the film because he hasn't displayed the same level of intelligence. So they create this whole other character, this mad scientist, to come up with the whole blackmail plot and the creation of the female.
I love how he's getting him boozed up and he slips presumably some sleeper serum in his drink or whatever that was.
You see, Quaaludes in the...
Yep, some roofies. Oh, good thing there was a bed right there. He's a smooth criminal, that Dr. Pretorius. See the little chair with the little heart in it? That's odd. But anyway, so I don't agree with the bride not having enough screen time shit. I mean, it's a build-up. I agree with that summation of it. And also, the journey of the monster is so well-developed that I can't really slight that. And I also think this movie is incredibly well-paced. Maybe it's not long enough. Can we make that criticism of it? Maybe it's too short.
Possibly.
Man, he moved quick. He got all the way to that cave, put on a hat and everything. Jesus.
They would never have done this in 1935. But how great of a reveal would it have been if come to find out, like, he had done the job, he had made the bride, and then come to find out that some of the parts that they put in the bride had actually come from Elizabeth. Like, they killed her with...
Well, what if she wasn't even dead? What if they were harvesting her while she was still alive? And when he gets back to her, she's, like, mangled and fucked up. Like, missing an eye or something. Oh, that would be good. Yeah, but they never would have done that in 1935. Again, if you were remaking this, you would do that now. They are. Oh, wait, yeah. They are remaking this. I wonder if they'll do that. They probably won't. It's too good for
It'll
them.
Involve all kinds of Russell Crowe.
Yeah, it'll be like Tom Cruise being thrown through a bus or something. It won't involve actual horror. Well, that's a good shot. See, there's lots of more... This is like the first Frankenstein meets the Invisible Man meets the Mummy in terms of cinematography, you know?
There's so much... There's so many elements being balanced here. There's horror, there's comedy, there's a bit of camp. And it's all just balanced so well.
And I think the Never Neverland setting is why the camp is okay. Like, I don't have any problem introducing camp into these gothic, dark horror movies because they are set in this fairy tale-esque gothic setting. It's not like... See, if you did that in the fucking dark universe or whatever, it would feel weird because they're taking themselves so fucking seriously. You know?
We haven't even hit the campiest moment yet when Dr. Pretorius introduces her, He says, "The Bride of Frankenstein," and then we have that like zoom in on her with the music going like
Yeah,
dialed
well,
up
that's the moment that everybody remembers and plays in the clip shows, and they forget that that's like near the end. It's not like halfway through like the original. Maybe you do have her get born closer to the start, and her rejecting the monster happens the same way, and his little shit fit that he throws and running off into the woods still happens, and he still has like this journey of self-discovery. Like, that could have all been roughly the same, and you could have had her going through similar stuff. Maybe Dr. Pretorius is like grooming her to be his like, to be his like his creation and his real success. That could have been interesting. Just thought about that now.
Yeah, the problem is all these Universal Monster movies are really short.
Yeah, but I'm saying if you would have had this happen earlier, you would have had plenty of time for all that.
Yeah,
and everything could have been the same, pretty much.
But then you wouldn't have gotten as much of the monster interacting with different people and all of that good shit.
You couldn't have done as much of it, but you could have done this. Like, you would have done exactly the same thing because he would have been rejected and thrown off,
No. Considering how far the bride got in the book, I think it's a little much to demand more of her in the film. You know what I mean? I don't think I would change anything. Like, we're lucky that she got to stand up off the table and hiss. That was,
Yeah, but if you're going to bring her to life, you would want to do more with her. Especially the way it's advertised. Anyway, point being, this is where the kites come from. That's not from the first movie. The kites in Young Frankenstein come from this movie.
I mean, to be fair, if they really cared to do more with her, they could have just had her survive the explosion the way it turned out that Boris Karloff did.
Maybe they should have. Yeah, but they should have killed Karloff in that anyway, because that's such a perfect ending. We belong dead. Like, they really shouldn't have had him survive.
It is the perfect ending, and
and Son of Frankenstein is such a bizarre sequel because what they say happened didn't really happen.
It's kind of a Terminator 2 situation,
Son of Frankenstein feels like T3. In a sense.
What I'm saying, it's a Terminator 2 situation in that, in my headcanon, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, the second one's really where it ends, and everything else is just kind of supplemental,
Yeah, well, I think it feels that way about itself, given how different it is. Because it's still good, it doesn't feel as connected to this.
As much as I love Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, maybe even more that I love this movie for nostalgia reasons.
Yeah, I can see that. I probably have more nostalgic love for that. I would probably pop that in before I'd pop this in. But I do objectively think this is definitely better. Because it's just got more going on in the narrative and in the scope of the cinematography and filmmaking overall. It's also paced better. It's also paced better than Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman.
I feel like Ernest Thesiger and Colin Clive were in a contest. Let's see who can look creepier in extreme close-up. They keep cutting back and forth between them, and every time each one feels like they've got more shadow on their face.
Well, what I think Colin Clive is doing a good job of evoking in the face is that he's kind of getting back into this, even though it's in this horrible circumstance. He's getting back into the mad science of it all. We got some more monster murder for you. That was a nice doll that he threw off that castle.
Yeah, why did they just kill that guy? I'm a little fuzzy on that one.
The monster's mad because he knows that he got the shitty end of the stick. He probably figured out that they were going to get rid of him. Because realistically, he's going to be a dead weight at that point, because the bride will be the perfect experiment. I mean, I would keep him around as just muscle, like he'd been used for prior, but the idea was that Pretorius was going to throw him out. I do also like that, we get the same kind of reveal as we got for the monster in the first film.
Yes, but this time it's Dr. Pretorius touching her wrist, which I think works because she's really his brainchild, He's the one behind all this. He's just been using Frankenstein.
That was an odd, reference to the first movie when he said it's alive again. And he was like, it's alive! It's alive! And it was this super close-up. It didn't feel nearly as powerful as the first. It felt like a parody of the first movie. Which I don't think this is at all. If anything, it just feels like... It just feels like this more campy version, It doesn't feel like a parody.
I think it's a tad satirical, but I wouldn't call it a parody.
Yeah, well, they're different things, certainly. It's, it can be a little tongue-in-cheek about it, but it's not just straight up, making fun of it. She's more like a cat, whereas he's more like the monster was more like a dog when he was brought to life, more kind of reluctant and angry, whereas she's more kind of like, what's going on? Bouncing back and forth. She's a little more curious.
You can already tell that she has a higher bit of intelligence, though, than he did.
Yeah. Well, she's also, less fucked up.
Another difference between a dog and a cat, huh?
Ooh, that was a good intro between the two of them. There was a bit earlier where the monster looked into some water and he saw a reflection of himself. And he splashed the water, realizing how hideous he is. This is a callback to that moment. I also like that little motif they carry throughout the entire movie, the way that Karloff holds his arms out is like, please accept me. It's so sad when he does that this time. He's trying to show that they're the same. And she's realizing that they are the same, and she's not thrilled about it.
Should have took a mirror, Boris Karloff, and you could have been like, look, bitch, you ain't so hot yourself.
Well, that's the point, is that she realizes that they are the same, and she's screaming as much at the horror of her own existence as him. Okay, why would you put a lever that would do that?
Everybody always draws the Bride of Frankenstein's hair like Marge Simpson's hair. It's really more of a fro, almost.
Yeah, it's there's more life to it.
It's just all crazy.
I don't buy that he would let Frankenstein. I guess maybe he would because he forced him into it.
I don't really buy it either, but
but Frankenstein was already redemptive about making the monster in the first place. He didn't want to make the bride, so maybe he feels bad about it.
But I don't think the monster would have that perspective on it. I think he would.
I don't know. I agree. I don't know if he would either. But I think it's debatable, and I think that's why. Maybe that's why Whale did it. I don't.
No, I can tell you exactly why Whale did it, because it's 1935 and they got to have a happy ending.
No, you know what? I don't know if he wanted to do it. I think maybe the censors forced him.
That's what I'm saying. This has either the studio or the censors written all over it.
Yeah.
Probably not.
I don't even think they got enough screen time together for this to even be worth it.
Probably not the censors. It was probably the studio's idea, because it looks like they would have involved a lot of, Like, they actually had to film that. It's not like they could have just cut.
Yeah, but the
something
Hays
out.
Code but the Hays Code was involved from the production stage. Universal got them involved so that way they could make sure they were going to put something out that was already approved.
So it's probably it could have been either one of them though. Point is, I don't really buy that, but
No, I
whatever.
don't either. You're right.
gotta go off.
They mention Elsa Lancaster as playing Mary Shelley, but not the monster's mate. That's a callback to the first film where they don't credit Boris Karloff as the monster.
That's fine though. Colin Clive and that woman got to go off and have a son, so it's all good.
Absolutely. So Dylan, that was The Bride of Frankenstein. Pretty damn good movie indeed.
Yeah, pretty damn good, I would say so.
Again, James Whale definitely has the best of these, and I would say this is probably his second best after The Invisible Man.
Yes, it's definitely. I don't know. I like all the movies we're talking about.
Yeah,
but
there's
it's
none of them that I think are. There's none of these that I think are bad.
But if I rank them, this is certainly close to the top of the pack.
Totally,
for me,
without a doubt. So next up, we're gonna go to another favorite of mine, another nostalgic favorite of mine. Yours, I definitely know as well.
Yeah, we're gonna
with the
leave
next one.
30s far behind us and go to 1941 and talk about Lon Chaney Jr. in The Wolfman.
Indeed. So join us next time. Hopefully it'll be recorded on a full moon. We're not going to actively try to make that happen, but if it happens to happen, great. If not, who knows? Until then,
Is there even a full moon coming up?
I don't fucking know. I'm not a moonologist. What do you want from me? I am Bill
Moonologist?
Wurst. I am Bill Wurster, aka Zazubaar.
I'm Super Damn 64, I guess.
And we recorded a commentary. It was at night. What more could you want? Until next time, good night.